should be studying.
This meeting is being recorded.
Great, great. So first of all, I would like to introduce Susi. Susi is California State University, East Bay. Among her books, I would like to mention Husserl's Ethic and Practical Intentionality, published by Bloomsbury in 2015, Phenomenology of Sex, Love and Intimacy, published by Routledge in 2018, and Human Emotions and the Origin of Bioethics, published by Routledge 2021, and last year, the monumental The Ethics of Love, published always by Routledge 2022. Susi writes also for Psychology Today and works also as a philosophical counselor. Susi, thank you for being with us today. Your talk will illuminate the relationship between phenomenology and philosophical counseling, and the floor is yours.
All right. So thank you very much for your invitation. Thanks all of you for being here. I see some names that I know, others.
I cannot hear you.
Why? Oh God, nothing. How is it possible? We were talking.
Can you hear me?
Very well.
Yes?
Yes. And you? So Pierrick Simon says that he can hear us both, which is good. Now I see you speaking, but muted. Okay. Oh, good. All right, perfect. Okay. So today, as Francesca was saying, I will work on the interconnection between philosophical counseling and phenomenology. I found this interconnection extremely helpful, and I would like to share a bit with you of my practice and my expertise as an academic. I think many of you are already experienced with philosophical counseling. The title of philosophical counselor varies according to the country where you get it and the experience, the previous experience you have when you start doing it. So my personal path was with APPA, American Philosophical Practitioner Association. Lou Marinoff is the president. He works in New York. And yeah, at some point in my life, I felt the need when I was quite younger, at the end of my 20s, I felt the need to implement my philosophical knowledge with a practical expertise. I felt that philosophy could do something. Nevertheless, optimistic as usual as I am, when I went there, I thought that this title would have served just myself, that nobody would have ever used philosophical counseling, that it was too weird, that there are already many forms of counseling, and the philosophical one, after all, wasn't the one for practical use for people. And I was incredibly wrong, fortunately, because yeah, after a year or so, I started receiving more and more clients. The clients I work with are people who don't have specific pathologies. If at some point I spot some serious issue, I refer them to colleagues of mine who work in psychiatry or who are psychotherapists, according to the issue. I do a screening to check if they are in need of medication, if they might have more serious issues. And in the end, my ideal client is someone who has riddles to solve. I would say, who find himself or herself in front of some kind of epistemological or ethical problem that cannot be fully seen. I think that philosophers are really good at seeing the full pictures, the full picture of an issue, of something, to have the general sight of the problem. And so generally I tend to accept people who find themselves stuck and they need some help in unfolding their thoughts, whether they are just about getting to know fully something. I want to change my job. How do I make this a decision as an informed decision? Or ethical. My wife, and these are all real cases, my wife is incredibly mad at me because she says I behave like a child. Why do I do so? Where is the flow in my ethical behavior? So these are the kinds of questions I generally cope with. Of course, Piero Adot is one of the great reference points for my work, because yeah, with him we started having spiritual exercises inspired by philosophy, especially of course Stoicism, Epicureanism, a certain kind of practical philosophy, but mostly I use phenomenology. I think that phenomenology is an immense resource for studying the lived experience, because of the motto, back to the things themselves. So you have a client that come to your office with a specific lived experience, and then you start going backwards in looking at that lived experience. Sometimes you need, of course, to make this slice of lived experience wider. Sometimes it can remain that little slice of problem, and you just go zero in that part of the problem. So I started doing counseling at the very end of the academic titles I got. So when I went to studying for philosophical counseling, I was told to use all that I learned in my PhD, in my master, my experience with teaching. I was strongly encouraged to be biased somehow, in the sense of using my personal knowledge, even if it felt abstract, even if it felt somewhat belonging to the ivory tower. Well, my master was in human rights and international law. So in that case, it helped, especially during COVID, because I had women who were suffering from physical and emotional abuse at home. And in that case, having a master in human rights helped to redirect them to the right persons who could help them, and giving also them some courage to make the next move. But in general, yeah, I noticed that yeah, the intertwine of this expertise can help in counseling. So today specifically, I'm going to discuss 6 questions. I hope I'll be able to cover all the 6 questions, otherwise I will stop when we need. This is an article that is going to be published with Francesca, with Springer, and is, yeah, it's an article on happiness. I basically asked Husserl the questions that my clients ask me. And so in this article, I gave the answers that Husserl theoretically as far as I know his work, would give my clients in front of these very simple and specific questions. By the way, parenthesis, soon will come out a beautiful interview we just held yesterday with Francesca on happiness as well. It was really a wonderful interview, and it will come out with the podcast, The Meaning of Life, Philosophy, When Philosophy Gets Personal. It will take a moment. I'm still producing it. So this is the list of questions. Can I have all that I desire and still be unhappy? Would good habits help me to live a happy life? Can I decide to be happy? Can I be happy when I always have bad luck? Would I be happy if I live like a saint? Could I have achieved happiness if I sacrificed everything for the others? Is happiness achievable anyway? Is there a perfect happiness in a perfect reality? So these are the questions. In general, the literature on happiness in Husserl is very, very little, and I was quite surprised because happiness is, something to strive for, although yeah, it's a concept, as we said yesterday with Francesca, that needs to be criticized. We don't want to give in a constructed idea of happiness, something performative that needs to fit for everyone. Nevertheless, Husserl's definition of Husserl's researches on happiness are quite interesting, and I was surprised when I approached this topic to see the very little literature available. If you want to read something, you can find Drummond, Heffernan, Brudzinska, Cavallaro and Heffernan. This article of mine that is coming out soon. But as far as I saw, not much more. Now, the general idea of happiness for Husserl is, if you want, very close to the Aristotelian one, meaning even the translation in English, the translation happiness in English is a little bit wrong, as we do for Aristotle. It would be much better to translate happiness with flourishing, with well-being, because in English the root hap, H-A-P, gives a sense of happenstance, of something that happens by chance or luck, which is absolutely not what Husserl meant by happiness. In happiness, in Husserl, happiness is similar to Aristotle in the sense that it's closer to the word eudaimonia, meaning daimon. Eu in Greek means good, and daimon is a very complex word because it comes from the Greek daidomai, which is that act of cutting pieces of something, and the daimon is what you receive from the tyuche, from the destiny, as your piece of destiny, as your piece of life. So the daimon today has been translated as demon, which is not the bad demon. It has nothing to do with Satan or anything like this. It's the good spirit. It's a spirit that, it's a guardian angel that accompanies you throughout your life to guarantee you well-being. So happiness in Husserl means that that action, that series of deeds, of actions that you take in order to keep this daimon, this part of life that has been granted to you, happy, satisfied, good, and these will ultimately lead to a flourishing life. So we are free from luck, chance, what the environment gives us, because happiness is ultimately somewhat up to us, up to the way in which we weather the the environment, what is around us. So let's go with the first question and the first case. I examine case and questions. Can I have all that I desire and still be unhappy? Oh, yes. It's clearly the answer. So in this case, I was with this client. He was very young, in his mid-20s. Yeah, I mostly worked in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, and Zurich, Switzerland in general. In this case, this client was in the Bay Area. I was working in tech. And so in the mid of his 20s, he was already quite wealthy, successful, and theoretically had whatever he wanted. Yet he was in my office because something was missing. What was missing? It wasn't easy, of course, to define it. In the end, we realized that he was quite lonely. Even if he had a stable girlfriend, this girlfriend seemed very much like, my son starts being argumentative here in the background. So even if his girlfriend was quite stable, I don't know, he was seeing her almost like a commodity. She was pretty, she was well-mannered, so it was good to share with her a certain part of his life, of the parties, of a specific kind of life. Of course, here I don't go into any analysis of his personalities, of the pathologies that this person could have. Generally, philosophical counseling, the last 4 to 5 sessions, it happened to me just once that I had a client for 1 year, because it was truly an investigation to understand the core of her problem. But in general, I addressed the question. And when I see that there was some problem, in this case, maybe there was some narcissism going on, I try to address different, as I said before, different specialties that could help the person to go on. Now, how did I answer his question, and how my answer could have helped him to find his way out? If we study Husserl's theory of personality, in this case, of construction of personality, we see that there is a sort of a cycle that keeps working in the construction of our personality. Meaning everything starts because of affections. When we live life, we are not yet subjects. We are things among other things, and we are affected by anything that happens in this stream. Nevertheless, at some point, these higher affections wakes us up. And we have the ability to say yes or no to certain affections. For example, I realize in this moment that I feel hungry. I feel that my subjectivity has to make a choice whether to go and eat something. So we are not living always in the form of egos, in the form of subjects. Here I use ego in an Husserlian way as a position taking in relation to certain stimuli. We live our life in this stream of affections, yet some affections wakes us up and we have to make a choice. The moment in which we make choices is extremely delicate, Because it's from this choice that we tend to create habits, and the core of habits, the lasting habit, as Husserl calls it, is what creates my personality. So I have a number of affections that tends to wake me up, and I handle these affections in a way that I need to decide whether this affection is good or not for me, whether it could be an instinct, it could be just an instinct, so I let it there, or it could become an actual volition, so I make it happen, or it's a desire, so again, I decide what to do with this desire, and so on and so forth. So the pre-reflective ego is what is at the basis of the construction of the personality. What happened in the case of my client, as far as I saw it? He tended to stick to his habits for a desire of prestige, power, fun, and so on. So his personality was quite strong, built upon these habits, and those instincts which are key to change the route of habits and to address us towards something new, toward desires that might lead us in different directions, or volitions that can build our personality in the shape of different habits, was somewhat clouded or stopped in the fear of losing all that he had. So even if he wanted, as he said, to create a deeper relationship with his girlfriend, the fear of losing his status, the fear of being seen as different from his girlfriend was too hard to give in the instinct, because sometimes he had that instinct to open up toward her, or to give in the deep desire to live a different life. Same thing with changing jobs. It was absolutely impossible for him to decide to make other career choices, even if that job made him absolutely desperate. He felt a completely full of purpose in the job he was doing. So in this case, the problem was very much connected with the habits and the reflective personality that he wanted to see. We helped, of course, after challenging him in trying to make different choices and so on, my job was over. I mean, we understand it that his instincts were leading him in a different direction, while his habits were in the opposite direction. At that point, once we had the epiphany in relation to this point, I let him go. I referred him to other people. I don't think he followed my referral. Happiness was still something far to be achieved. Even if it's a work in progress, even if he had all that he desired theoretically for his life, these desires were certainly empty. Now, a case that is completely the opposite to this one might be summarized with the question, would good habits help me to live a happy life? So in this case, this was a very interesting case. because I had this client who seemed to be very poised, a very tranquil childhood, balanced life, and so on. And she was in my office because, again, something was missing. So we had to do this investigation. She was unhappy. And she didn't know how she could get to that space of well-being. She had a boyfriend, maybe a quite demanding one. He was living in I will I will keep the details that might make the client recognizable hidden. Of course, they were living a 1 hour plane from each other, let's put it this way. And there was a certain pressure for him, from him, for her to give up on her job. So there was something there. But she loved him, and the life seemed to be in a perfect balance. So I started deconstructing her habits. So let's see if what you are actually doing is conducive to your well-being. So this boyfriend of yours, for example, do you, when you two meet, when you spend time, do you actually feel pleasure in staying together? And for her, it was a sounding yes, because I want to be married to him. I want to have children with him. This job you are doing, it keeps you away from your hometown. Does this job give you enough satisfactions, enough gratification for you to sacrifice your, you know, a certain slice of your intimate life? Yes, because it's a very good job, it pays well, and it's exactly in the field of expertise I wanted to work with. Your friends, are they good? So a very analytic investigation. It took us a while, and then again Husserl gave me a little bit the key. So I noticed that her answers were all of Husserl would call them second volitions. So Husserl says that there are two kinds of good. An ethical good, which is the universal good, the good for the society, the good for the well-being of the whole. So a kind of an impersonal, or I might say suprapersonal good. That makes us almost like the categorical imperative in Kant, make us like the starry sky above us. And there's a vocational good, which is very much called to connected to our calling, to who we are as a human being. So in her case, it seemed that she, that was so interesting, that she reinforced her personality and their habits on second order volitions. So she wouldn't accept those habits that were coming from her personal instincts, from her personal desires, from this personal awakening. She would tell, she was very analytical and reflective. She's still alive. So every instinct that would awake her from her status of being a thing among the other things would be very closely observed, analyzed, and if it wasn't good enough or too threatening, she would reject it. So basically, she built her personality on second order volitions, on an ethical good. She built her personal life on an impersonal personality, which is quite interesting. Maybe Judith Butler would call it a performative personality, meaning yeah, she was happy with her boyfriend because the goodness was to be married and having children. She was happy with her job because the goodness was to work for a prestigious company and being paid well. Same thing with friends. So while my other clients at least let himself be connected to his instincts and habits at the beginning, meaning when he was younger, he wanted to have prestige and a great job, a good-looking girlfriend, so on, and he reached that, and then he was in an impasse. This client really never connected with her instincts. She had this super long relationship with this boyfriend, which was never questioned, and yet children or the opportunity for a life together would never come. The job, okay, it was a little more challenging because it took more grit to reach it, but nevertheless, it wasn't the job that she actually desired. So we worked quite a bit and very well together. At some point, I referred her to other people, but she wasn't capable to a psychotherapist, but she didn't feel, and honestly, I didn't see any red flag going on. But when the relationship goes on for more than a month or so, I always give the opportunity to choose. There weren't big red flags, but nevertheless, I referred her to be cautious to a psychotherapist. I tried to work together. It didn't work well. We continued working together. And basically, we deconstructed this impersonal personality. We did a brutal job to reconnect with instincts without throwing them away too fast or bedding them too analytically under the sight of reason. She needed to be in her body. She needed to be in her body in a pleasant way, because even the body was lived in a impersonal way. So I do these exercises because I need to reach this physical appearance. So we had to work extremely on pleasure, on feeling the sense of physical happiness, embodied well-being that would help her to decide what was good or bad in her life. Eventually, she broke up with her boyfriend, but then they come back together after a year. She quit her job. She found another job. I mean, it was a serious, a very hard work of reconnection with her personality, which ended up in a very different life that she's living now. Apparently, as far as I know, a happier life, a life that fits her much more, even if it's not the life she thought that it was good for her. But that's how life it is. As we were saying with Francesca, there's no fixed box we need to be in. Happiness is this diamond. To follow the Australian lead, is this part of our spirit, our destiny, our complex of talents, skills that needs to be listened to, that needs to be followed and patiently unfolded, because it's not immediately given, especially if you don't have time or patience to listen to it. It's shy. It's like a small baby. It needs its time and space to unfold. So that's the job we did very beautifully with this woman. Yeah, then there is this other client. Can I decide to be happy? This case was shocking, was really shocking for me, in the way in which it unfolded. Because the investigation landed in a place that was completely unexpected to me. So she was a PhD student in her late 20s, a beautiful woman. She was pursuing her PhD in a very competitive university. Sometime she had some imposter syndrome, thinking that, yeah, maybe this is too much for me. She seems to be married to a caring husband. She came to me because she was very frustrated with her husband about, how can I put it without being too revealing, about the training, the physical training he was giving her to reach a higher level of her discipline. So her husband was also her trainer. That's how they got together. He kept being her trainer. And yeah, she came to me because he was extremely frustrated by the way in which he treated her. Okay. So we started investigating, and honestly, I didn't know from where to start, because it's very tantalizing to tackle this case in an easy way and say, okay, tell your husband to speak to you in this and that way. Bam, done. But there was more than this, of course. So we started from a free association on her past lived experience, because the slice of lived experience she gave me was, I felt it was a little too small. And since happiness is very much connected to this circle I was describing to you before, of volitions, habits, and instincts. So we started free associating. And after a while, something came up, but after, in this case as well, after a few months. So at the beginning, we were really discussing her day at work, day with her husband, with her friends. So it was very much connected to a circumstantial lived experience. Then she started giving me glimpses about her past life. And basically, it came out that she was victim of an abuse. Yeah, basically, harassed is too light. Raped is so strong, somewhere in the middle, I guess. But she was victim of from a serious abuse from a friend of hers, and she never recognized that as an abuse. Rather, she presented that in a very casual way as a moment in which she lost control. And she misbehaved, and she basically took away all the responsibility from this friend of hers, who dragged her and took advantage of her when she was in her 18 or so. And so the problem here is that she was an extremely volitive person. So her volitions were first order volitions, very connected to her instincts. She knew what she wanted. Nevertheless, a component of happiness for Husserl is Selbstbesinnung, meaning the self-determination of who you are. You need to be able to look at your lived experience, to look at your past, to look at your flow of affections and instincts as they sink back in the past, in order to determine their meanings and to connect to these meanings. So in this case, this woman was completely disconnected from her past life. And she was disconnected because there was lots of shame. Even before, eventually she acknowledged, without me pushing it in any way, it was something she arrived at by herself. She acknowledged that this was a kind of violence. Even, mamma mia, it was also connected to a very powerful shaming act, because this person went to her boyfriend at the time and told her, you know, your girlfriend did this and that. So there was a heavy weight of shaming. I just proposed her to do to write an autobiography, to write why this epiphany came out, because I proposed her the exercise of writing about her life, wherever she wanted to start, wherever she wanted to go. And then she would come in our meetings and she would read what she wrote if she wanted, and we would comment and so on. So slowly, this act of Selbstbesinnung, of self-determination, of past flow of affection started taking shape. And she started feeling the connection with what happened to her in the past. And probably the sense of frustration she was feeling toward her husband was connected to the inability to speak up for herself. The sport training was in any case a kind of a physical training in which the authority of someone else was on her. So afterwards, I could see some parallelism. When this problem came out, of course, she started a therapeutic path on her own, but at least we managed to get in possession of the key that made her life with her husband unsufferable. The kind of frustration she was feeling for him was impeding the happiness of their marriage to unfold. They just got married. That was the first year they got together. And she felt that something was wrong. And to our surprise, that slice of unhappiness was impossible to reach because of this impossibility of self-determining her past, to connect with who she was in the past. And that connection, as it often happens, was impossible because of the level of shame it was connected with. Yeah, I still feel very sorry for this woman, because the friend who took advantage of her was still in contact with her because it was still a friend. Yeah. Next case. Yeah, this is another interesting case. Would I be happy if I lived like a saint? Could I achieve happiness if I sacrifice everything for others? So I consider this to be a very Mediterranean story. I'm Italian. She was from another Mediterranean country, and I felt some kind of connection to her mindset. So it is true that according to Husserl, you cannot achieve happiness if you are if you can't experience empathy, if you can't be interested in others people's happiness, because intersubjectivity is a very strong base of who we are for Husserl. So and here it comes back at the first and second order volition. So the well-being of our life is built both on this vocational good and on the ethical good. They go hand in hand. So it is true that it's very difficult for me to be happy if my intersubjective world, in my intercorporeality, the environment is not happy. Nevertheless, in the case of this woman, it was brought to the extreme. She was she was married. She had 2 children whom she loved with her life. She came from a very authoritarian family. Her father was very authoritarian, and apparently she chose an husband, as it often happens, that was somewhat similar. Why did she come to me? Out of guilt, I would say. Nevertheless, she was feeling guilty. And she couldn't set herself free from this sense of guilt. And so, yeah, we started talking, we started examining her life. And I remember at the beginning, I was very practical with her because I needed an entrance to her life. So I asked her how was the arrangement of sleeping at home, for example, because she seemed extremely tired, you know, with 2 children. For me, she was a hero. Already one, I understand how difficult it is to handle. 2 children, job. So do you get enough rest? Do you have support? How is the relationship with your family? The family was far from her. Nevertheless, there was always some stabbing, some jab at her. She wasn't behaving like a good mother. She wasn't giving enough attention to her husband, and so on and so forth. And also with her, I had to trust my instincts, because when I met her, I had the feeling that it was impossible to reach her. And I think that, yeah, in this case, the client was during COVID, so it was fully online. So I didn't have the in-person feeling, which makes things trickier. But I felt as if I couldn't reach her. So I had to unfold my instinct. And I realized that it was as if she had a wall between herself and the world. And this world was her children. So everything touching her was nevertheless redirected to her children. It was really difficult to be able to help her. And she was, I realized after a few sessions, that that sense of guilt she was experiencing was real guilt. I mean, the family was resenting her quite a bit, because it seems she took on a vocation that was like the sort of a Virgin Mary. The excellent mother that sacrifices everything for the wealth of her children, of her husband, of her family. She had a strong vocation. She loved working, and even work was experienced as a kind of a guilt, time that was taken away from her children. So she sacrificed everything for this family, and this family was strongly resenting her. And I understood their resentment because nobody asked her to sacrifice anything. She basically interiorized a model that came probably from her family, probably from, the culture in which she was living and so on, for which being a good woman meant being that. So while the Virgin Mary had an actual vocation to be the Virgin Mary, she had the calling to be who she was. My client didn't receive that vocation. She had a strong vocation in her job. She was excellent at what she was doing. All the sacrifices she was imposing on her family, you should be grateful to me because I'm doing this and this and that, were misplaced. They didn't have a feet to walk on because neither were requested from the actual family nor from her instincts and desires. Because in fact, with time, she developed an extramarital affair that she disclosed to me in pain, in a situation of high suffering, because she needed a space where to be just herself. So it was truly hard for her to conceive a happiness that was more vocational and less ethical. She had to deconstruct the character she imagined good for herself. She had to deconstruct the habits of high sacrifices that she kept working on in order to be herself. So she could be a good member of her family without giving up on herself. That's the main message I try to pass to her, although in this case not successful. I mean, we left our work together with her who seemed to have intellectually understood this point, but I don't feel that it was an actual embodied understanding. It might take therapy for that. Here I'm sharing with you quotes from Husserl and so on, but I'm talking. If you want, you can ask me for the article and I will share the bibliography and the quotes more systematically, but I'm freely talking. So yeah, there are several places here in which you can see that the happiness of you as a human being is connected, according to Husserl, to pursue the realization of your vocational values and not just the ethical values. Your personal sense of love, your personal sense of what is good and wrong is and bad is foundational for being well in the society. I think this is the last case. So can I be happy when I always have bad luck? And can I be happy in a senseless world? Here is back. So here Husserl refers to Kierkegaard in saying that when choosing happiness, we make a kind of a rational choice to choose the irrational chance, meaning we don't know if happiness exists or not. We don't know if we live in a perfect world or as in Leibniz or in an irrational world. But if we want to be happy, we need to believe in the possibility of happiness. A step to reach happiness is, according to Husserl, the Überschau. meaning the ability to look at all your life and make sense of it, which is, for example, something that was missing in the woman who experienced violence. There was, the Überschau was not possible. She couldn't make sense. So you need to have the faith of living in a world that eventually would make sense for you. Hence, if you get stuck on the belief, this luck is always against me, or this world makes no sense, happiness would never possible to be achieved, according to Husserl. In this case, I had this client who was truly unlucky, I think. And nevertheless, she managed to achieve incredible results. I mean, it was COVID again. She lost her job. She was extremely talented at. She had her husband who got, they both got COVID before the vaccines were discovered. And the husband became extremely violent against her. We don't know if it was an effect of COVID. The doctors said it could be. She was living in a society in which basically her well-being, the possibility of living a normal life was completely connected to her husband. Yeah, sometimes especially when I do online job, I might connect with anyone in the world. So I had this privileged view on different and difficult view on different countries. And so in that case, her livelihood was completely dependent on this man who suddenly turned violent. So she was in an extremely unlucky position. How to help her? The way in which we started working together was basically working on her own resources, on what she had, on her personality. Again, on this cycle of volitions and habits. On one hand, the volitions awakes you to something new. The habits keeps you connected to whom you were in the past. So we kept working on these two sides of her to set in motion a change that needed to happen for her to come out of that mud, of that very hard situation. So she needed to determine herself as the person she was in that moment, according to her new vocation. This case took sleep away from me because I was feeling extremely apprehensive in relation to the kind of life she was living. I gave her, of course, again, referrals to extra support that she might have, Center for Women or therapy and so on. And she turned around her life in an incredible way. She managed to reconnect with the job she was doing before getting married, 20 or more years before. She managed to connect to her talents, her skills, and she turned her life completely. She used connection to people in other countries to, you know, expand their job and have an excuse to move and work elsewhere, while keeping her marriage, while keeping her life with her children going on. But she found a way to give an overview of her life and make sense of that senseless world, truly senseless world she was living in such a successful and powerful way. And as far as I know today, now she is the breadwinner in the family. She has to cope with their children who don't understand her completely. They are a little married at her because she's still with this with her husband, but nevertheless, she understands. It's a choice of hers. And yeah, she turned her life completely. And as far as I know, still today, she's living a much happier life than when we met in my office. And so to conclude, which is a little bit what I was saying before, is happiness achievable anyway? Is happiness a reality? And here I generally use this saying we have in Italian, gente allegra Dio l'aiuta. I mean, happy people, if you're happy, God, the universe, the destiny might help you a little bit more, which is a light way to restate what Husserl was saying. Basically, that if we rationally believe in the possibility of a satisfactory life, if we have faith in the possibility of happiness, we might have more resources to achieve meaning. And meaning is the key to many routes to happiness. So sometimes it requires a job of ongoing repositioning, of epoche, meaning parenthesizes all the messiness that you are going through, and try to do an essential view, Wesenschau, of the eidos of what is talking to you in that moment. So it takes quite a reshaping job on yourself, but it's possible to achieve. And I learned a lot from my clients. I'm still learning a lot from my clients, because even in the cases in which I felt the most apprehensive or that seemed most complex to me, a way out was found. So thanks all of you for listening to me, and I'm very happy to be in conversation with you about what we discussed so far.